Hey, Crawlspace listeners, we wanted to bring you an episode that recently aired on our other podcast, Missing.
So for any listener who doesn't know, like you said, Tim, we have two shows, and we always want to air episodes of Missing on Crawlspace when they are appropriate and relevant.
Okay, and that's what we are bringing you here today, so please make sure to like and subscribe and follow us on social media. Thanks a lot for listening.
On the recording, you can hear him finding his children, him saying things allegedly like, oh my God, she killed the kids. It was played out in the courtroom. And Lindsay broke down, Patrick broke down, jurors broke down. The cameraman, my cameraman, texted me. He said he was crying. He's never heard anything so dramatic and terrible.
In today's new episode, we are speaking about the trial of Lindsay Clancy. And Lance, this is a really tragic case, and we've really got to give a trigger warning right up top here, because this is a very difficult conversation. This involves 3 children who were murdered. That is 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. And Lindsay, their mom, is now on trial. And we had a great opportunity to speak with reporter Sierra Gillespie about this trial. What'd you make of this conversation?
You just mentioned that this is a difficult conversation to have, but I don't think that we could have found somebody better than Sierra to come on to talk about it. She's following it in real time. This happened in Massachusetts, Duxbury, which is right around Cape Cod. So the 3 of us in this conversation are all from Massachusetts. So this is kind of like in our own backyard. And the content is so heavy and disturbing. I mean, to talk about homicide just in general is disturbing. But to talk about filicide of 3 children, the youngest of which is 8 months old, is such a dark, heavy topic. But Sierra was able to come on and just bring a attitude that and an air about her that made this conversation a little bit more palatable to have with each other. It raises a lot of questions. It's an important conversation to have. The mental health of any individual who's going through postpartum depression or psychosis has to be seriously addressed. While we say that this is very rare, what happened in Lindsay's case, it still happens. You know, tornadoes are rare too, but they happen. So this conversation has to happen, and we have to take whatever verdict and analyze that, whether she's guilty or found to be not guilty by way of insanity.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot to break down here, and the trial is expected to last over 6 weeks. And we're just at the beginning of it here. So hopefully we will have Sierra back on later in the trial to give us some updates and discuss how it's been going. But you can follow Sierra's work on social media. There are links in the show notes. And she also produces a great podcast called Scandal from the Law&Crime Network. And there are links in the show notes for that as well. So please let us know what you think of this conversation on YouTube and Spotify. Please take care of yourself while listening and follow us on social media at Missing CSM. We're going to break real quick here for commercial, and we'll be right back with Sierra Gillespie. Welcome to the podcast, Sierra Gillespie. How are you today?
I'm doing so well. I'm so excited to be on with you both. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, we are honored to have you on. You are quite an accomplished journalist. You're quite an accomplished individual in your field, and we're going to talk about something that is really, really dark and a conversation that we have to have, but it's going to be a little bit difficult, I think. But before we get into all that, do you mind giving a little background on yourself for our listeners?
Yeah, of course. So I host the podcast Scandal on Law&Crime. So I'll be on the main channel, Law&Crime. We cover everything, whether it's murder, a salacious civil case, a case kind of like this one. And I also have a long-form podcast called Crimes of Passion. This is available exclusively on Spotify, and then I have my own channel on YouTube for that as well. Both of these are audio and video, so you get a little bit of both, whatever, choose your own adventure. So pretty much anything in the world of true crime, I'm your girl.
Very cool. And how did you get involved in this true crime?
So I started as a local reporter. I'm actually from Wisconsin. So I was doing everything you can imagine. Right now, I would be doing tornado coverage, the local stuff of it all. And back in 2020, in my home market of Madison, Wisconsin, there was this double murder on the UW campus. And I mean, if anybody follows like Big Ten football, Madison's huge. The Badgers are huge. So to have two people murdered on campus was huge. And Nancy Grace's team wanted to do a story on it. So they plucked me out of obscurity, a local reporter, had me come on, and I said, hey, I kind of like this. And so I asked if I could come back, and I started working as an investigative reporter on true crime stories with Nancy Grace, rather. And after that, I saw a posting for Law&Crime, and I great foot in the door through Nancy, and I got the job here at Law&Crime, and I've been, on cam ever since.
We have had the honor and privilege to meet Nancy Grace and have conversations with her. She was on, or we were on her show talking about one of the first true crime stories that Tim and I covered, the disappearance of Maura Murray. And the first time you talk to her, you get this, beforehand, you get this incredible adrenaline rush because you don't know if you're going to be the one that she pins down and doesn't let back up. What was that like when you first met her? And then how was it when you realize, wow, she's helping me, she's actually making sure I'm going to succeed in this industry?
I mean, it is crazy because even if you're not a true crime person, you know who Nancy Grace is. Everybody knows who she is. If you watch Gone Girl, there's a character that's essentially Nancy Grace. Everyone knows who she is. So when I got asked to be on the show, I was like, okay, sure, kind of nervous, but I try to compartmentalize and just put it aside. This is another person. This is another woman. And by the way, she knows her stuff. She will school you. And you're right. If you are going down a path that she doesn't like, she will call you out and she will say, wait a minute, that's not what I heard, blah, 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 whatever it may be. And so it really was great to learn from her because she's doing 1,000 different cases at once and she knows everything about all of them. I truly don't know how she does it. She is the top of the game, and she really, really taught me a lot.
Yeah, it was definitely a sweat-inducing experience being on her show, especially because we were speaking about Maura Murray's case, and frankly, there just aren't a lot of concrete answers in that story, and that was not okay for Nancy. She was really following up with obscure answers that we gave, and not satisfied with those answers.
If anyone is going to get answers about a case, it's Nancy Grace. I mean, come on. She wants to know it all. And for a case like that, the Maura Murray case, there are so many questions. And I feel like that probably sparked Nancy to be like, okay, we got to do some digging on this. We need to get this figured out because it is a true mystery. So she's really the pinnacle of everything true crime, one of the best.
Well, as much as we'd like to keep talking about Nancy Grace, I feel like I'm personally just postponing the inevitable conversation that we're having you on for. There's been this crime that is a dark cloud over this community in Massachusetts here. I'm not talking about Karen Reed. That ship has sailed, I guess. But this one is a lot more, and not to diminish any victims from Karen Reed's crimes, but this story is a lot darker. It's a lot more difficult to process. Can you give us a little bit of background on what you are working on right now?
Yeah, so we're talking about the case of Lindsay Clancy. This happened back in January of 2023, and I remember when this first happened. I mean, it shocked the community. I'm here local in Massachusetts as well, so everyone here was talking about it, but not just here in Mass. It was all across the country and maybe even world. People are talking about this case because the details are really so gruesome and devastating to have to talk about. And also it kind of opens a larger conversation in terms of postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis, mental health. So I'll kind of lay out the facts as we knew them at the start, back in January. This happened on January 24th, 2023, when 32-year-old Lindsay Clancy killed 3 of her children. And I'm going to say that she killed them because she does not dispute this. Her defense admits she did kill them. That's 5-year-old Cora, 3-year-old Dawson, and 8-month-old Callan. So the specifics of what happened are really gruesome. So just to prepare your viewers that this is kind of tough to talk about. But Lindsay was in the throes of a mental health situation at the very least. I don't know if it was postpartum depression or psychosis. Officially, that might be determined in court, but she was going through it in the mental health side of things. And her husband, Patrick, had been kind of supportive with her throughout all of this. But on this fateful day in January of 2023, she asked him if he could run out to CVS to pick up something for their daughter, Cora. She needed some Miralax, or the off-brand of that stool softener, essentially. And then she asked him at the end of the day, can you pick up some dinner from the 3D restaurant in Plymouth? So their home was in Duxbury, Mass. This is on the South Shore, kind of almost on the way to the Cape for people who are unfamiliar with Massachusetts. And Plymouth is maybe 20 minutes away from where he had to drive. And Patrick says, everything was normal. I wasn't nervous to leave her home with the kids. You know, earlier in the day, she was building a snowman with them. We were taking photos. She seemed pretty cognizant and normal, but Patrick left. He went to this restaurant to pick up the food. He went to CVS, where he actually had a call with Lindsay, and he said she sounded normal. It sounded like she was in the middle of something, but, you know, a mom could be busy doing all sorts of things. And when he came home is when he found that gruesome scene. All 3 children had been strangled with exercise bands, and Lindsay herself had jumped out of the 2nd-story window. And by the way, this is January in Massachusetts, okay? So it's snowy, it's cold. She landed on the frozen ground. And by the way, on top of all of this, she had attempted to end her life. She slit her throat and her wrists and had ingested a whole host of pills hoping to end her life. She has since been deemed paraplegic from this. She's paralyzed from the waist down. She did not die, but the 3 children ultimately did. And now we're kind of in the midst of this 3.5 years later as she's on trial for 3 counts of murder. And I mean, that's just the tip of the iceberg in this case.
Can we just learn a little bit of background, I guess, on Lindsay and really the family? What kind of job, what career did she have? And what about Patrick as well?
Yeah, I think this is pretty interesting because Lindsay's from Connecticut, not too far. I mean, it's still New England. She and Patrick met because she was actually his cousin's roommate. So they met in, I want to say it was around 2015, that kind of era. They were in Southie in South Boston. They met, hit it off. They started living together, first in Quincy, I believe, then in Weymouth, and eventually Duxbury. And her career is really interesting to me because she was a labor and delivery nurse at Mass Gen, which this is Massachusetts General Hospital, truly regarded as one of the top hospitals in the world, by the way. It's kind of a pipeline for Harvard. You know, doctors from Harvard then work there, or nurses, whoever. If you have some sort of illness, that's where you would want to go, right? And it's interesting that she worked as a labor and delivery nurse, kind of because of the postpartum depression defense of all of it. But according to all of her friends, her coworkers, she was really diligent. She was really caring. And, you know, for a lot of women, giving birth is, I mean, memorable, to say the very least. I myself haven't done it, but, you know, I've heard it's pretty painful, and I've heard it can be rough. And according to her patient, she was very caring. She was very helpful. Actually, her oldest daughter, Cora, was named after the first baby that she ever helped deliver. So she was really passionate about her job. And it wasn't until after her first, second, and then third baby that she started to experience signs of postpartum depression, maybe even psychosis in all of this. So her job is interesting. Patrick, he works for Microsoft. Actually, right now he does too. For a time, he was in person, and then eventually he worked from home. So on the day of these killings, he was working in the basement of their home. He kind of had like an at-home office. So, I mean, by all accounts, looking at the photos and everything, this family looked so amazing. I mean, they're all beautiful. They're all well dressed. They're very professional. They seem educated. They seem like they have good jobs. They have a house in Duxbury, which, by the way, I'm looking for houses and I don't think I could afford in Duxbury. Like, it's a nice area. They look like a great family. And so to have this tragedy, the juxtaposition of the happy family photos and then autopsy photos, I can't even think of the words to describe it or really comprehend.
Yeah, I'm not a psychologist or a psychiatrist or anything like that. And looking at those pictures, I kind of went down a rabbit hole a bit because there's no sign of, and I know these are just like snaps in a grander period of time. You're taking a fraction of a second and you're looking at it and determining whether or not a family's happy. But you're right, like they looked very happy, and they looked very well put together and have no indication that there was anything going on beneath the surface. So that adds to a really like unsettling part of the story.
Yeah, and it's hard because, right, like my Instagram, I'm posting photos where I look nice. I'm not posting where I'm like breaking down crying after work, obviously. I usually don't like photograph those moments. So you're right, we have to take it kind of with a grain of salt. But if you look through even photos that have been entered into evidence, they look so happy. And these are photos that weren't even necessarily posted to social media because, again, we post like the nice photos, right? But these are photos that they just had in their camera roll that they took of their kids. The kids, by the way, look so happy. Cora's 5. She's going to school. On the day Dawson died, it was his first day. He was 3. He dressed himself for the first time, which any parent of a toddler knows that's huge. For him to pick out his clothes and do it, he was so proud of himself. So even looking at the kids, they just looked normal and happy. And now it's just so tough to have to think about what happened to them.
Do you know, was Lindsay back working after having her 3rd child?
So no, she actually wasn't. And this is interesting because according to Patrick, every time after she had a child, she would go on her maternity leave, right? And then the pattern kind of became that when she needed to go back to work, when I don't know what it would be, the 12 weeks or whatever it may be, depending on the birth, when she was supposed to go back to work, she started to get anxiety. She started to get nervous. She didn't want to leave the baby. And so after Cora, she went back. After Dawson, she had a bit longer of a maternity leave. And then after Callan, it really got rough, let me say. So he was born on May 26th of 2022. And after that, both Lindsay and Patrick had off. So pretty much the entire summer of 2022, things were great. According to Patrick, like they would go to the beach, they would hang out. It was like family time for them. That was great. But in late August, Patrick went back to work. And that's when things got a little more rough for Lindsay. She was supposed to go back to work in October of 2022. But according to Patrick, her symptoms of depression, anxiety, suicidal ideations all kind of came to a head and became worse. So much so that she actually never did go back to work after Callan.
And do you think that profession, that work that she did, do you think that contributed to the postpartum in some way?
That's a really interesting question that I hadn't thought of. People ask me that a lot about my job. Do you have to go to therapy? When you're talking about these really gruesome cases and details? And honestly, yes, I do go to therapy. But I'm mostly not talking about my job. I'm talking about myself and my life. So I do compartmentalize. However, I have broken down about cases, and I do wonder if she's seeing something in person, the delivery of these babies, the moms who are going through it. Again, to actually deliver a baby is rough, let me just say. So for her to see this day after day, maybe it did have something to do with her postpartum and dealing with going back to work after all of it.
Yeah, I was thinking that because you're giving so much of yourself to these people that are putting so much trust in you, and you are just naturally, as an empathetic person at that time, are trying to take care of them and do the right thing for them. After so many times of doing that, I wondered if she might have felt like she wasn't getting the reciprocation just from this sounds really I don't know, esoteric or something. Maybe she wasn't getting what she needed back, in general from everything that she's given.
Like giving her everything to this person because, childbirth is dangerous and you're seeing this person who's clearly in pain, bringing a life into the world. That's, we don't have to go into the meaning of life here, but that's kind of what it's all about, And so to have something like a new life being brought in, that's so heavy, that's so serious. And to your point, I do think if you're there in a room with a woman who's giving birth and she's in pain, the empathetic part of you is like, how can I help you? Let's make this as smooth as we can. And so you're giving so much. I'm sure it was exhausting to say the least. And then if she didn't have some sort of reciprocation, words of affirmation or something to lift her up, that's a good point. It could have really affected her.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
Just curious here, have there been any accusations of domestic abuse in the relationship?
I haven't seen anything like that. Patrick kind of keeps to himself after this, understandably so. I would probably want to stay out of the limelight. He did do one interview with the New Yorker, and then he's now been on the stand, I believe, Monday. Today's Wednesday. At the time of this recording, he was on the stand for those 2 times. But other than that, he's kind of kept to himself. They're divorced. He's remarried, actually, at this point. But I haven't seen anything about accusations in regards to Patrick being a bad husband, being violent, 911 being called in the past for any sort of situation like that, or, protective order filed. I haven't seen anything like that. By all accounts, I think he was a good father and husband.
And what side is he testifying for?
Okay, this is so interesting. This is such a great question that you have here. So, kind of both sides, right? So he is the prosecution's star witness, and this is because he's the one who found the children. He found Lindsay outside first, and then when he got home from CVS in that restaurant, he went downstairs and found all 3 children who were there. And there was a 911 call that he made that, he said, SOS, please come help. There's something terrible that happened at my home. And after that, he didn't realize or didn't care to hang up. So on the recording, you can hear him finding his children, him saying things allegedly like, oh my God, she killed the kids. Now, there was a ruling from the judge that this could not be played. So it was not live streamed. It was not recorded. It can't be anywhere in the media, but it was played out in the courtroom. And Lindsay broke down, Patrick broke down, jurors broke down. The cameraman, my cameraman, texted me. He said he was crying. He's never heard anything so dramatic and terrible. So such a mess. But anyway, so he took the stand for the prosecution. He went through as their star witness, kind of describing all of this. And generally after this, he would be open to cross-exam from the defense. And kind of how that works is that the defense could only ask in regards to questions that the prosecution posed. So generally, if they wanted Patrick to testify for the defense, they'd have to call him again separately. But there's these special circumstances that I've never heard about before until this case. And it's that the judge has allowed Patrick to be called only one time. So the defense can ask cross-exam questions, but they can also ask questions as part of their defense right away at the start of the case. And this is essentially just done so that Patrick can be spared the emotions of having to be on the stand time and time again. He now lives in New York, so at the very least it would be a commute coming from New York up to Massachusetts and there, but also just the mental anguish of having to go through and talk about this over and over again. So it's really interesting. Yes, he testified for the prosecution, but he will for the defense too. And he also, I should point out, has been steadfast really from the beginning. I mean, after these deaths happened, he came out and said, this is not my wife. This is not her. This is not normal. She was going through postpartum psychosis. This is simply not her. So he, while he did testify for the Commonwealth, I believe he's on the side of Lindsay, that this is not murder, that this was a mental break.
Do we have any idea when her mental illness actually started to show signs? Was it actually before she gave birth to the first child?
So we haven't heard testimony yet from any medical people, in terms of these are her files, etc. So most of it, what I know right now, is coming from Patrick. And according to him, Cora was born, I believe, in 2017. Yes, because they were married in 2016, December of 2016. So she's born the following year, 2017. And that's the first hint of any mental health issues that Patrick says Lindsay had. She didn't have anxiety or depression or anything kind of, in college or the rest of her life. It was really after Cora was born. And it seems, according to Patrick Clancy's testimony, with the birth of each child, it became more severe. So I know a lot of women have some form of postpartum depression or anxiety after their child is born. I mean, that's relatively common. I believe the statistics are 1 in 4 women. So maybe they thought initially after the birth of their first daughter, Cora, okay, this is kind of normal for a woman, right? Like, unfortunately, it's just something that happens. Then after Dawson, their second baby, it happened again, got kind of worse. And then the third baby, Callan, that's really when it started ramping up. So he's born in May of 2022. Again, they were together for most of the summer and things were good. But when Patrick had to go back to work, I'm thinking September, October 2022 is really when it ramped up to the full scale that it eventually led to.
And what sort of medications was she on? I know that this has been included in the trial on some level. And is that an effective defense or an effective tool for the prosecution to talk about her medication?
Okay, yes. So the medication is huge here because the defense claims, and there has been separate lawsuits here where Patrick Clancy himself has actually gone after some of the doctors who prescribed her these medications and said this was malpractice. She raised red flags. She had the warning signs. She was failed by you and the system. And throughout this, and now we've seen in the trial too, I believe it was 13 different medications that she was prescribed, so over a dozen. And we're talking normal, quote unquote, things for people who have anxiety or depression. Prozac, Zoloft, Seroquel, things like that. And honestly, just to be frank with you and your viewers, I have anxiety, I have depression. I've been on all of these medications, not at the same time, but they're kind of common in the world of psychology and psychiatry. So she's on these, and Ambien, that's another one because according to Patrick, after the birth of their final child, Callan, she was not sleeping. It was like 2 hours a night. And I know that after giving birth, for both parents, it's usually, you're struggling to catch those Z's, right? But I think for her, it was worse. And she started to experience what she called hallucinations. So she had Ambien too. And I think this kind of goes both ways, right? The prosecution says, she didn't take all of her medication. They had the bottles. You know how you would get, 30 days at a time or 90 days at a time from the pills? They say, okay, she only took 6 of these. She wasn't consistently on whatever this medication was. So she can't be claiming this, that she was on all of these at once. She kind of stopped taking them or tapered off or whatever it may be. I don't know if that's a defense. However, I do expect to hear from the defense, Lindsay's team. I expect that they will call some sort of medical expert who can come on and talk about what these different kinds of pills would do to a person when they're taken in tandem, and also how they work in terms of postpartum depression. Because again, like if we're using me as an example, I'm a woman who just has anxiety and depression. I don't have the postpartum factor of it all. So does that change things when all of these things are put together? And I think it kind of goes both ways. It's a lot of things in this case go both ways. I mean, if we're talking about the Apple Maps, is that something that you guys want to just talk about, like the maps and everything? Okay,
Yeah,
I'll
please.
just go right into that. So, okay, this can be used both ways, right? So the Apple Maps fact is Lindsay Clancy took her phone out, and the day of the deaths, January 24th, 2023, she Googled or Apple Mapped her phone, how far is my house in Duxbury from the 3V restaurant in Plymouth and the CVS? And that's where she sent Patrick out to, right, to pick up the food and then the Miralax for her daughter. Now, the prosecution says she sent him out on purpose so that she could clock how long he was going to be gone because she wanted to commit murder. Again, the prosecution is saying this is murder. She was premeditated, which they claim that this shows. She was planning out all of this so that he would be gone and she could carry out her scheme here, okay? But the defense kind of counters this, or likely will when it's their turn, and say she was just being a normal mom. She was seeing how long would he be gone so she can kind of mentally prepare for, okay, he's going to be gone for about a half hour. Okay, I only have a half hour. Then I have dad to help me, put the kids down or take a bath or whatever it may be. Because I believe, and this hasn't come out yet because obviously the defense has not presented their case, but I do believe that they're going to say the break happened after Patrick left. Because at the time, Patrick says he testified on the stand today, Wednesday, at the time of this recording, and said, no one told me to leave, like I wasn't allowed to leave Lindsay alone. No one's raised the red flag. Lindsay herself seemed normal. She wasn't slurring her words. She was making sense. Everything seemed like a normal another day. I was just going to go pick up dinner into CVS. There were no red flags here. And so I think that the defense is going to argue that there was a break after he left. And there's talk of voices and hallucinations, but I think at the very end, both sides are going to argue about the same evidence, and it's really going to come down to the jury to decide who is making the stronger argument.
And was she currently on the medication at that time?
I don't know exactly which one she was because, again, I know what she was prescribed, but I don't know what she was taking, right? Because, I mean, I wish that we had some sort of like video of her like every morning taking a pill or not taking a pill so we would know exactly what was in her system. I haven't seen anything reported whether they did I don't know if it would be toxicology or some sort of test once she was in the hospital after her attempt to see what exactly was in her system. So she was definitely prescribed some medications, but I don't know exactly what she was on that day.
This is a really hard one as far as the premeditation goes because she cared for those children, well, most of them for years without abusing them, I'm assuming. And then in this moment, she decides to do what she did. I'm at a loss for how to sort of judge that.
It's hard, right? Because you see the photos like we were talking about where Cora was going to school. She was like in preschool. I believe Dawson was too. You see the photos of their home where it's any home that you would expect for loving parents, where they have finger paintings on the wall or they have the placemats that are the ABCs so the kids can learn their ABCs and their numbers. It seems like just from the offset, she was fostering positive relationships with her children, caring about her children, learning and potty training and, loving them. At least that's what we've seen. That's what Patrick has come out and said. However, I will note that in 2022, kind of after Patrick went back to work, this is September-ish area, that she said to Patrick, I'm nervous, I'm going to hurt myself, and I'm nervous, I'm going to hurt the kids. So she came out and said to him on multiple different occasions, I'm thinking of, suicide and harming the children. And that was the first time he said that he ever heard anything like that, was kind of in the months or weeks leading up to what eventually happened. And I don't really know who that helps. If that helps the prosecution because there's premeditation because she talked about it before, or if it helps the defense that this is a symptom of postpartum psychosis. She was raising the alarm and the red flag, and Patrick did help her to eventually go to the hospital multiple times. She was institutionalized briefly at McLean Hospital, which again is a really renowned hospital, kind of northwest, I believe, of Boston, where people go to have psychiatric help. So she was there too. So again, evidence that can go kind of both ways depending on what you believe.
Yeah, I was just thinking that, knowing that did she admit herself to McLean?
So on December 31st, she went to Mass Gen, which is interesting again because she worked there, but it was because she was struggling with suicidal thoughts, and Patrick was really nervous that she was actually going to attempt suicide. So they put her in Mass Gen, and what they decided, the doctors who evaluated her said, this is really severe. You need to be placed in McLean. So that happened the following day on January 1st of 2023, and she was only there for a couple of days though. And I think that's something the prosecution points out is they were like, okay, she wasn't there extensively. She was there for a couple of days. She turned down some group therapy. There were other therapies that she turned down, that she rejected. She didn't want to be part of. Patrick says, I don't know any of this. I don't know what happened. I only saw her there a couple of times. But I think McLean is really interesting because leading up to the deaths, she had been institutionalized.
Right. And she communicated that to Patrick, and then she communicated that to staff, hospital staff, doctors, and what I'm guessing psychologists or psychiatrists. So I don't know how this could be like a premeditated murder. I don't know what the prosecution could really be going for at this point, because postpartum's a thing. Postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis is a thing. It's not like we're just figuring it out now. It's proven. So what's your thoughts on that? Does the prosecution actually have something to go on if they want to make it into a premeditated murder?
I mean, it's hard, right? Because premeditation, this is something I didn't really know before working in true crime, but premeditation can happen almost instantaneously in the snap of a finger. It's not like what most of us think, where here's another case out of Massachusetts, Brian Walsh, where he was Googling things, remember, about his wife, essentially how to get away with murder or what to clean up or whatever. It shows that he was planning. And yes, that is premeditation. But in most states or commonwealths, as Massachusetts is, it could happen instantaneously for you to decide, okay, I'm going to kill that person, and it can be regarded as first-degree murder. So the threshold for the premeditation, not super high, though I believe that the prosecution thinks that they have it with the Apple maps of it all, number one. And number two, with Lindsay coming forward to Patrick in fall of 2022 saying, I think I'm going to hurt the kids here. So that's kind of important. But to your point about postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis being something, we could talk about the Andrea Yates trial too, which we saw happen, 20 or so years ago at this point. I think the jury might lean that way. And again, this is just speculation. I was in the courtroom last week and I did see the jurors. I know that they were crying in court today, but so many people are furious with the Commonwealth for bringing these charges because they say it's so clearly not murder. It's so clear that she had this mental break. And it seems like, when I was in there in the courtroom, the Commonwealth is firm. They're fiery. They're doing their job as they should, bringing forth the evidence and fighting against the defense. But I think by and large, people who comment on my videos or who are following, they all say, I'm shocked that first-degree murder charges were brought in this case. And I personally am kind of surprised, too, that they were. I do think that that's going to be a discussion when it comes time for deliberation, that the jurors might say this was overcharged here. I don't know what's going on.
We'll be right back after a quick word from our sponsor.
And a thank you to our sponsors. Back to the program.
On one hand, though, most postpartum depression or psychosis doesn't end in murdering children. And on the other hand, though, she didn't Google, can I get away with murdering my children?
Yeah, I think that's another great point that the Commonwealth is going to talk about, because so many people, like I was just saying, 1 in 4 women are diagnosed with this. My sister, for example, she had postpartum depression. Her son, thankfully, is alive and well. And many women have this, right? And it's terrible, and it's something that needs to be studied, and they need help. And I agree with all of that. But the Commonwealth can point to this doesn't happen all the time. However, I will note that postpartum psychosis is a lot more rare than postpartum depression. So postpartum depression, 1 in 4, postpartum psychosis, 1 in 2,000. And on top of that, most women who are diagnosed with postpartum psychosis or believe that they have the symptoms don't actually carry out an act like this. They may hear voices that tell them to harm themselves or their children. However, we have seen past cases where women do believe that they have postpartum psychosis or are diagnosed, and they have killed their children, Andrea Yates being the main one that a lot of people talk about. So I think, again, it goes both ways. You're right. Most women who have been diagnosed don't do something like this. But I think, to Lindsay's credit and her defense, something that's positive is they're not denying that she killed her children. They're not saying this is a whodunit, she wasn't there, whatever. They admit that she did it. She did do it. But why did she do it? Was she criminally responsible at the time? And that is the key.
Correct me if I'm wrong. The difference between postpartum depression and psychosis is that psychosis, you start to have indicators of maybe schizophrenia or something, hearing voices. So is that the primary difference? What is the difference between the two?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly right. Postpartum psychosis, you have more of the symptoms, to your point, that are like schizophrenia, where you may have hallucinations, you may hear voices, always pretty negative things, whereas postpartum depression is more just like intensified, not to belittle this or simple it down, but is more like intensified anxiety and depression. Maybe even OCD can get into it. You know, an example would be, I'm afraid to leave my baby. I have to be with my baby all the time, because if I leave my baby alone with my husband or my partner, something's going to happen. I have to be here. And kind of things that don't necessarily make sense to the rest of us, but you just have these feelings. Whereas in psychosis, I believe you at some points do hear voices.
Has there been anybody yet to testify to that end, like an expert in the field?
You know, it's crazy. I don't know when you post this, but we're recording this Wednesday. There's been one witness so far, and it has been Patrick Clancy. So we've really only heard opening statements from both sides and Patrick Clancy, and that's it at the time of this recording.
That's wild. I've been looking into this, and I guess I just assumed that there had been others because, and Patrick was like the main one that everything has been like focused on. I just assumed that there had been others. That's wild that I went into it with that assumption.
Well, it feels like it's been going on for a really long time, because last week it was supposed to start, and usually trials start on time. You have like 1 or 2 days of jury selection, and then you would get through with opening statements and whatever, and it kind of, we'd be in week 2, we'd already be on witness 7 or something. But last week, I will tell you, jury selection was unlike anything I'd ever seen before. I think it was really tricky for them to find enough jurors who, first of all, hadn't formed an opinion on the case, hadn't heard about it, because this has made national news, obviously. Additionally, a lot of people would raise their hands or indicate, I've already formed an opinion. I think she's guilty. I think it's murder. A lot of people I saw literally came with Kleenexes up to voir dire in front of the judge, both sides, and Lindsay herself. They had Kleenexes. Multiple people had to be excused because they were crying so severely. And on top of that, there were multiple jurors who were seated. And then the next day came back, and one juror was very animated and said, I can't do this. I can't be on this. I can't listen to the testimony or evidence in this case. It's going to be too much for me. I can't take it. And so he had to be removed. Actually, 3 jurors in total were first seated on the jury and then removed. So I can understand understand why you thought we were farther in all of this, because it feels like it's been going on for a while and the deaths happened 3.5 years ago at this point. But this is one of those cases that's very meticulous, slow and steady, and it could take us even into September.
Now, you mentioned the case of Andrea Yates, and I was wondering if there was any other legal precedent that could be relevant here.
Okay, so Andrea Yates is out of Texas, and I do think a lot of people are posing parallels here, and I don't know the exact statute, so forgive me, out of Texas, but I believe she was found not guilty by reason of insanity or something of the like, that since the verdict has come down, Andrea Yates has been in an institution, and that's where she remains. I believe, actually, I did a report a few years ago, months ago, kind of blends together, but she was up for parole, and she said, I don't want to be taken out. I want to be in the institution. So she's still kind of going through all of that. So I do think there are parallels. I do think that the defense attorney is going to take a look at that case. However, the statutes are likely different between Texas and Massachusetts. So if this was a federal case, sure, we could refer to it. But I think the defense attorney, Kevin Reddington, would probably have to look at any past cases here in Massachusetts. And again, this is so rare that I don't know that there's any that have been tried here. I mean, Mass is one of the oldest states, or commonwealths, I should say. So maybe there's been something way back in the files, but I don't know of another one off the top of my head that they could just pluck out and say, in this ruling, blah, 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 whatever happened. So I think they're going to pay attention to it, but I don't know how it will actually impact this case.
And we're all in the media, so we might have a different perspective than some other people who are consuming this as it's being broadcast. But what are your feelings about a trial like this being consumed by the general population in real time?
Oh, this is hard because especially being here in Massachusetts, you guys know everyone was watching Karen Read. I would go get my nails done and they would be talking and they were like, oh my God, you work for Law&Crime. What do you think about this? Like everyone was watching it almost like OJ. And so while I work in true crime, I like that people are kind of invested in these cases because it gives me a job and something to do and talk about. And I, too, enjoy watching trials. But this case, I feel like, is important that people watch. This is just my opinion. But I think it's going to be very monumental in whatever the ruling is, because maybe it will lead to statutes regarding women who have been diagnosed with postpartum psychosis. Maybe it will lead to more research or more of an open dialogue about this, because, I mean, full disclosure, I am talking about having kids at this time. This is something I hadn't thought about before. I thought, okay, I'm going to have a kid. How am I going to pay for it? I didn't think, how am I going to be mentally stable after all of this? Is this something that could happen to me? And so I think that this case is going to be so important just to have people, men and women, thinking about this, talking about it, and whatever the verdict may be, it could impact the future of women in Massachusetts and maybe even across the country.
Well, this has been a great conversation. Just my last question here. Have there been any surprises in trial yet that have sort of come up and shocked everyone?
I don't think it was a surprise, but a shock, I will say, when the 911 call was played, that everyone lost it. I mean, Lindsay, there's video of her literally hands covering her face, just bawling. Jurors, too, crying, which I have seen jurors cry in past trials or get emotional. But I mean, to have all of the jury really losing it, the cameraman crying behind the camera, that's not something that you often see in a case like this. And I think that was a shock, and it just shows that the evidence in this case is so gruesome, because any murder is unjust and shouldn't happen. And again, this is an alleged murder here, but we do have the lives of 3 children, the youngest being 8 months old, who were killed, strangled, by the way, not an instantaneous death. This was one after another after another. And so I think just the evidence in this case is going to be so hard for everyone to hear and come to terms with. Again, we're only in our first witness at this time, so I think there will be some surprises, but for those watching, just make sure to take care of yourself because this is going to be a heavy one.